Welcome back, you beautiful enigma. Yes, you, the one they can't quite pin down, the one who keeps them up at night, scrolling through old conversations, trying to decode what the hell just happened. Let me tell you a story. It's not fiction, it's not exaggeration. It's the most expensive mistake they ever made. They hired 3 professionals. Not amateurs, not your average gossips with opinions. No. They brought in the specialists. A psychic, a detective, and a CEO. 3 different lenses, 3 different approaches, 1 single mission. Figure you out, decode you, explain you, find the weakness, the pattern, the crack in the armor. And guess what happened? All 3 of them walked out of that room shaking their heads, refusing to write the report, quietly suggesting that maybe, just maybe, they should leave you the hell alone. Because what they found wasn't a person. It was a frequency they couldn't tune into, a code they couldn't crack, a presence that didn't fit into any manual they'd ever studied. Now you might be asking yourself, why would anyone go through that much trouble? Why hire 3 professionals just to understand 1 person? I'll tell you why. Because you terrified them with your silence. Because your absence spoke louder than anyone's presence. Because you didn't react the way you were supposed to. Didn't break when they pushed. Didn't beg when they ignored you. You did something far more dangerous than fight back. You evolved in the shadows while they celebrated in the light. You transformed while they were busy performing. And when you emerged, when you finally stepped back into view, you weren't the same frequency anymore. You were operating on a wavelength they'd never encountered, and that sent them into full panic mode. So they did what threatened people always do. They tried to study you, contain you, reduce you to data points and psychological profile. They thought if they could just understand the formula, they could predict you, manipulate you, control you again. But here's the thing about people like you. You were never meant to be understood. You were meant to be remembered. Let's start with the psychic, shall we? They brought her in first. The spiritual expert, the one who claims to read auras and energy fields, the one who supposedly tapped into frequencies most people can't perceive. They paid her a small fortune, set her up with your photographs, gave her access to your old social media posts, your writing, anything that carried your energetic signature. She sat there for hours, silent, cards spread out in front of her, crystals arranged in specific patterns, incense burning, the whole theatrical setup. And then she started speaking. Slowly at first, then faster, her voice rising with something that sounded almost like fear. She said, "Your energy signature doesn't match your time." She said, "There are gaps in your story that feel like you died and came back multiple times, but there's no record of it in the physical world." She said your aura shifts between frequencies so rapidly that trying to read you is like trying to photograph lightning. You see the flash, but you can't capture the source. But here's where it gets interesting. She said something else, something that made everyone in the room go completely silent. She said you've been carrying wounds that should have destroyed you years ago, traumas that should have left you institutionalized, betrayals that should have turned you bitter and hollow, but instead of rotting from the inside out like most people do, you alchemized it. You took every ounce of pain they gave you, every moment of isolation they forced on you, every lie they told about you, and you used it as fuel. Not in some poetic metaphorical sense, in a literal, observable, terrifying sense. She said your energy field has scars, yes, but those scars glow. They pulse with a frequency she'd only seen in people who'd been through near-fatal experiences and came back fundamentally altered. She called you a spiritual anomaly. She said trying to manipulate someone like you would be like trying to trap smoke with your bare hands. She said you're not playing the same game anymore because you rewrote the rules while no one was watching. And then came the part that really shook them. The psychic refused to continue. She packed up her cards, her crystals, her notebooks filled with observations, and she said something that still echoes in their mind. She said, "This person has already walked through every hell you could imagine throwing at them. They're not afraid of you. They're not even aware of you anymore. You're background noise in a symphony they've already composed. If you're smart, you'll stop watching them before they start watching you back." And she left, just like that. Refused the second half of her payment. Refused to elaborate. Refused to write a formal report. Because what do you say in a report when the subject of your investigation feels more like a force of nature than a human being? What do you write when every attempt to pin them down just makes them more elusive? She didn't have the language. None of them did. Next up, the detective. Now this guy, he's not dealing with auras and energy fields. He's dealing with facts, patterns, timelines, evidence. He's the one who tracks people for a living, who knows how to find the digital breadcrumbs everyone leaves behind, who can reconstruct someone's entire life from their metadata. They gave him everything: your search history, your purchase records, your travel patterns, your communication log. They wanted a psychological profile based on behavior, not spirituality. They wanted cold, hard data that explained why you operate the way you do. And for weeks he worked. He built timelines, cross-referenced locations, analyzed communication patterns, studied your social interactions. He was looking for the tells, the contradictions, the moments where people usually reveal their true nature. But here's what he found instead. Absolutely nothing that made sense. He said your patterns don't follow normal human behavior models. Most people, when they're hurting, they reach out more, they post more, they seek validation and connection. You went silent, not just quiet, but completely off the grid for months at a time. And during those silences, there were no distress signals, no cries for help, no digital breadcrumbs of someone falling apart. Just complete radio silence, followed by reemergence. But each time you came back, you were fundamentally different. Sharper, more focused, more detached from the things that used to matter to you. He said it's like watching someone die and resurrect on a loop. But there's no external catalyst he can point to. No therapy receipts, no self-help book purchases, no spiritual retreat registrations, just silence and then transformation. Over and over and over again. He called it the most frustrating case of his career because every time he thought he found a pattern, you broke it. Every time he thought he understood your next move, you pivoted in a direction that made no logical sense but somehow worked perfectly. But here's the part that really got under his skin. He noticed something in your communication patterns that he'd only seen in one other type of person. High-level strategists, people who operate several moves ahead of everyone else. He said your messages, even the casual ones, have layers. You say one thing on the surface, but there's always a secondary message underneath, a test, a tripwire, a way to gauge how someone responds before you reveal anything real. He said most people communicate to connect. You communicate to observe. You're not looking for understanding anymore. You're collecting data. You're watching who reveals themselves and their response to you, who projects their insecurities onto you, who tries to manipulate you with guilt or flattery, and you file it all away without reacting, without giving them the satisfaction of knowing they affected you at all. He said it's the most sophisticated form of emotional self-defense he's ever encountered, and it's completely self-taught. No books, no training, no mentorship. You just learned by surviving. And then he said something that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. He said, whoever hurt this person didn't just create an enemy. They created a living case study in what happens when you push someone too far and they don't break. They adapt, and now they're operating at a level that makes them effectively untouchable. You can't guilt them because they've been guilt-tripped by experts. You can't manipulate them because they've memorized every tactic. You can't isolate them because they've already made peace with solitude. And you absolutely cannot predict them because they've stopped following patterns you recognize. My professional recommendation? Leave them alone. They're not a threat unless you make them one. But if you do, you won't see it coming until it's already over. He closed his file, refused to elaborate further, walked away from the highest-paying case of his career because staying on it meant acknowledging he was in over his head, and detectives don't like admitting that. Finally, they brought in the CEO, the business mind, the one who understands power structures, influence, manipulation tactics, how to read people in negotiations, how to spot weakness and exploit it. They figured if anyone could break down your psychological operating system, it would be someone who's built empires by understanding human behavior at scale. They gave him everything the psychic and detective had gathered, plus financial records, work history, every professional interaction you'd ever had. They wanted to know if you could be bought, leveraged, pressured, or seduced back into a controllable position. And this guy, he approached it like a hostile takeover. He studied you the way he'd study a competitor, looking for the leverage points, the emotional investments, the things you care about enough to compromise for. And what he found broke every model he'd ever relied on. He said you operate like someone who's already lost everything and survived it. There's no financial pressure point because you've learned to live on nothing and thrive. There's no social pressure point because you've already been exiled and came back stronger. There's no emotional hostage they can take because you've already grieved everyone who left and moved on. He said trying to negotiate with you would be like negotiating with someone who genuinely doesn't care if the deal falls through. And in business, that person always has the power. Always. Because the moment you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in the room. You're not desperate, you're not hungry for approval, you're not performing for an audience anymore. You're just existing at a frequency that makes everyone else's games look exhausting and pointless. But here's where it gets really interesting. He said something about you that he's only seen in one other type of person. Founders who've been through the fire. The ones who built something from nothing. Lost everything. Got betrayed by partners. Had their ideas stolen. Their reputation dragged through the mud. And still came back to build something even bigger. He said you have that same energy. Not the desperation of someone trying to prove something, but the quiet certainty of someone who's already proven everything to themselves and no longer needs external validation. He said it's the most valuable trait in business because it makes you immune to manipulation, resistant to pressure, and completely unpredictable to competitors. You don't play by the rules because you've already survived the worst consequences of breaking them. And then he said something that absolutely floored everyone in the room. He said, if I were smart, I'd hire this person, not investigate them. because whatever they've been through has forged a level of resilience and strategic thinking that you can't teach in any business school. They don't need motivation, they don't need management, they don't even need direction. They just need to be pointed at a problem and left alone. But here's the thing, they won't work for you unless they respect you. And based on what I've seen, I don't think anyone in this room has earned that. So my professional recommendation is this. Don't try to control them. Don't try to compete with them. And for the sake of everything you've built, don't try to destroy them. Because people like this, when you push them, they don't fight back emotionally. They outmaneuver you strategically. And by the time you realize what happened, they're 3 moves ahead, and you're explaining to your investors why everything collapsed. He stood up, declined the remainder of his consulting fee, said he'd rather walk away than be associated with whatever vendetta was driving this investigation, and that was the end of it. So there you have it. 3 professionals, 3 completely different approaches, 1 unified conclusion. You can't be figured out. You can't be contained. You can't be predicted or controlled or reduced to a neat little psychological profile that makes them feel safe again. And now they're left with something far more terrifying than the mystery of who you are. They're left with the realization of what they created, because make no mistake, you weren't born this way. You were forged. Shaped by every betrayal they orchestrated, every lie they told about you, every moment they thought they'd broken you. They wanted you weak, manageable, desperate for their approval. Instead, they created someone who doesn't need approval anymore. Someone who learned to thrive in isolation, to weaponize silence, to turn pain into precision. They tried to destroy you and accidentally built the one thing they can never defeat. A version of you that no longer plays their game. And here's what really keeps them up at night. It's not that you won. It's that you stopped competing. You didn't fight back with anger or revenge or public call-outs. You just left. You walked away from their narrative, their drama, their need to make you the villain in their story. And in that absence, you became something far more powerful than any winner in their rigged game. You became unreachable. Motherfucker? Untouchable, unbothered, and nothing terrifies manipulators more than someone who's immune to manipulation. Nothing scares controllers more than someone who can't be controlled. Nothing breaks narcissists more than someone who simply doesn't care what they think anymore. You became the one thing they never prepared for, free. So now they watch, still, even after the reports came back saying it's pointless, even after 3 professionals told them to walk away, they still watch. Because they need to believe there's a moment coming where you'll crack, where you'll come back begging, where you'll prove that all of this was just an act. But that moment isn't coming. It never was. Because you didn't change temporarily to spite them. You evolved permanently to save yourself. You didn't become cold, you became selective. You didn't become heartless, you became self-protective. You didn't become arrogant, you became aware of your value. And the difference between those things is everything. It's the difference between reaction and transformation. It's the difference between revenge and indifference. It's the difference between winning their game and creating an entirely new one where their rules don't apply. Let me tell you what happens next, because this is where it gets beautiful. They'll start seeing you everywhere, not because you're chasing visibility, but because your energy has shifted so fundamentally that you've become magnetic to the right people and repellent to the wrong ones. Opportunities will find you. Connections will find you. People who operate at your frequency will recognize you immediately, like a signal only certain receivers can pick up. And the ones who hurt you, the ones who thought they'd destroyed you, they'll watch it all happen from a distance. They'll see you thriving without them, building without them, glowing without needing their light, and it will eat them alive in a way no revenge ever could. Because you're not rubbing your success in their face. You're not posting about them, or talking about them, or even thinking about them. You've genuinely moved on. And to someone who thought they owned a piece of your soul, your indifference is the cruelest punishment imaginable. So here's what I need you to understand. That room, that investigation, those 3 professionals, it wasn't about finding answers. It was about finding reassurance. They needed someone with credentials, someone with expertise, to tell them that you're not special, that you're not as powerful as you seem, that eventually you'll come crawling back or fall apart, or reveal yourself as just another broken person pretending to be healed. But none of them could give that reassurance, because it would have been a lie. You are special. Not in some arrogant, self-obsessed way, but in the way that anyone becomes special when they refuse to let the world break them. You did the work. You sat with the pain instead of numbing it. You faced yourself instead of projecting onto others. You chose growth over comfort, truth over delusion, solitude over fake connection. And that combination, that particular alchemy of suffering and self-awareness, creates something rare, something powerful, something that can't be bought, can't be taught, can't be faked. They were never investigating you to help you. They were investigating you to help themselves, to find a way to sleep at night knowing they tried to destroy something beautiful and failed, to find a language that would make your survival make sense in their worldview, but your survival doesn't fit their narrative. It shatters it. And now comes the part they never saw coming. Because while they were busy hiring professionals to study you, you were doing something far more dangerous. You were studying them. Every attack they launched, you filed away their tactics. Every lie they told, you noted their patterns. Every manipulation they tried, you learned their playbook. You weren't reacting emotionally anymore. You were collecting data. And now you know exactly who they are. Not who they pretend to be. Not the masks they wear for the world, but who they really are when they think no one's watching. You know their fears, their insecurities, their weak points. Not because you are trying to gather ammunition for some future war, but because when you stop defending yourself and start observing, everything becomes clear. The fog lifts, the illusions crumble, and you see people exactly as they are. So here's the uncomfortable truth they're starting to realize. That psychic, that detective, that CEO, they were all studying the wrong person. They should have been studying themselves. They should have been asking why they needed to understand you so badly. What void in them requires your downfall to feel complete? What wound in them demands your suffering to feel healed? What fear in them needs your failure to feel safe?